What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Today, I am joined by Jack Thorburn. Jack, how you doing today, my man?
Firstly, I'm incredibly surprised that you just nailed the pronunciation of that bang on, because not many people get that right. For some reason, an N creeps in all the time. So there's always Thorburn. There's like a silent N that becomes not so silent. But yeah, thanks, Mike. Thank you very much for having me on. Keen to be on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's my pleasure, and I'm a little proud of myself for pronouncing it correctly. I didn't know there was such contrast in how people could pronounce your last name. But on this podcast, for fans of the podcast, we tend to be a nice blend of practical experience and science. People will be familiar with some of the researchers we've had on this podcast, going over some of their studies. Like recently, we had on Dr. Guillermo Escalante talking about some of his recent research. But at the end of the day, personally, I am a huge fan of natural bodybuilding and super passionate about the sport. So when I see others in the sport who I think are doing an absolutely fantastic job of sharing evidence-based information and just ultimately putting out a good example of what it means and what it takes to be an excellent natural bodybuilder, I'm quite keen to get them on to have a chat. And Jack, you're in the midst, or you were in the midst of a pretty extensive off season. I believe you put up a post recently about doing some sort of mini cut, and we'll probably dive into that later. But I have you on here because I do want to talk about the details of your most recent off season. So to kind of set up the background for this discussion, tell us about how long your most recent off season was, your general rationale for the strategy you took, and kind of tell us about your peak body weight in that off season.
Okay. I need to sort of put a disclaimer out there that the reason why my off season has continued for as long as it has was slightly influenced by injuries. Well, not necessarily injuries, but a few things that I had to tidy up. Like I had a few postural issues that I needed to be sorted, and as a lot of you know, dieting and being in a caloric deficit is not ideal for sort of healing up injuries. You're never really going to get on top of things if you're in sort of a deficit. So that was one of the reasons why I took so long out. So it's been 3 years since I competed last. My last show was in 2017. And those niggles crept in at the start of the prep, but I thought I might as well just see it through. There were obvious things I needed to improve on as well. I'd just taken the step from a junior bodybuilder to the men's open then. So I did 1 year in the open and then realized what I needed to do. I was competing at that time at around about 160 pounds, I believe. I have got it jotted down. It was, so around the high 160s, I think it was, and now I'm up to around about the 220 mark, 221. So that we're a good hefty, 50 plus up from stage weight. I needed a good 2 years, because if you're competing year in, year out, you are going to struggle to make any significant progress. You will make progress. Even though I have committed to this 3 year off season, it's going to be 4. I still believe you can make progress within a short period of time, because I did it. Between 2016 and 17, I competed in consecutive years, and granted, when I competed in 16, I made a few mistakes, which might have put me in maybe a lower body weight during the show, which I then didn't do the following year. But I was in probably better condition in the second year, and I was 7 pounds heavier. So I probably made significant progress, but just maybe didn't flatten out as much doing stupid things. Like I did, for example, I did a ketogenic diet for 16 weeks for my first show, which probably wasn't the best idea. So I am a big believer in, if you want to make significant progress, you have to commit to a longer, extensive off season, especially when you're a natural bodybuilder. I don't feel that I got back to quote unquote normal physiological ranges in terms of like hormonal levels and just general psychological sort of outlook within at least 5 months post show, I think, because I got pretty lean for my shows, and if anyone else has that feeling of being normal, takes a hell of a long time to come back. And really, if you don't feel good within your training, in your day to day, you're probably not making progress. Really, like you need to be in a pretty good psychological and physiological state to be growing. Which is why stuff like when you're stress free, you grow a lot more. So if you take that into consideration, if you've really got lean, you need that like four months minimum. If you're competing year in, year out, you don't even have a 4 month off season anyway. So you're never really getting back there. So that was 6 months gone before I even felt normal again. And then you start to make progress. I had, like I said, I had a lot of injuries, things. So potentially towards the end of the season, I'd regressed a little bit. So I needed to get back to where I was before. And then even more so because I realized what I needed to do to compete against the boys that I am now. Because I'm on the cusp of a heavyweight bodybuilder. I'm in between, I'm like top end of a middleweight. So if I come into a show a bit heavier, that puts me in the heavyweights, and they are big boys. Some of them are up to like 100 kilos on stage. So for me to hold my own there, I need to pack on quite a bit. So that was my main thinking. I'll go into why I think so. For me, I have no issues pushing my body weight up. I think this is jumping a gun in your questioning, but I am so focused on performance that I don't care. I think it's very easy for me because I don't have a massive social life in terms of I'm not going out every weekend. I don't think I need to impress anyone. The weather here for 90% of the time is awful. We're in a heat wave at the moment, so it's pretty good here. Like yesterday was the first time I had my top off out in the streets in years. But so the weather's not great here, so I don't have the urge to have my top off in public or stuff like that, you know. So there aren't many opportunities where I'm going out in public, not sort of covered up. For example, when I'm in the gym, I'm in the gym solely to it's like I said, very performance based. So I'm there to progress. So I don't care about what I look like during that time. Yeah, it could be quite cool if potentially you took your top off and you look pretty good, you had a good pump, whatever. But I'd be a lot more impressed knowing that I've made progress in my lifts, because ultimately, if form is standardized, that increase in strength, if you're not a newbie and it's not neurological based, it's going to come from an increase in sort of contractile tissue. You know, it has to. So if I'm by being very performance based, I know that any increase in that lift then is probably coming from an increase in muscle mass. So because I'm not going out all the time, I can just switch off from it. So it doesn't really matter to me what I look like under. You can't really tell if someone's carrying a bit of body fat if they've got a t-shirt on, really. And if anything, as a natural bodybuilder, you probably look a damn sight better with a bit of chub on you in a t-shirt, because by the time you diet down, you don't even look like you lift. So you know what I'm talking about, though, yeah? So I'd potentially rather look like I train by holding a bit of chub on me, and then just focus on training. So I think people need to take the moral victories of progressing in the gym more than how they look after their session with their top off, maybe. So in the off season, you should still be very performance based pre-contest, because that's going to indicate how, like, whether you're holding tissue. But I think in off season, you really do need to switch off and become very focused on your performance and remove. It's been mentioned that you remove yourself from how you look in the mirror, kind of. But then again, I know I'm doing a lot of talking here, and I apologize. but I can talk quite a lot about it. You don't want to get too sloppy in regards that you're not getting any additional performance benefits. There's only a limit until you don't get any more from it. You know, you'll know what I'm talking about in terms of you don't get the pumps aren't half as good. When you eat food, you just feel sluggish. You feel pretty sluggish just walking around. But it's a fine line because sometimes that is where you're really strong, but then you just go slightly over and you just feel awful. And then I'm lucky I don't struggle to eat. I never have because I'm a fat boy at heart. So I can eat, but I know a lot of people get to a point where they just can't eat. And if that's the case, then you then potentially tidy up as well. So I think that's essentially my rationale for why I've pushed up so much. I'll link back to the injury and the talking about performance. Like I became obsessed with getting back to what my previous. So like getting rid of all these injuries, just a lot of physio. So that's why I completely removed myself from how I looked. I didn't care because I knew I could stay lean as long as I wanted. And if I didn't get this issue sorted, it didn't matter because I couldn't progress because I couldn't perform as well as I needed to in the gym. So I just removed myself and I said, right, you need to forget how you look and get this injury sorted but anyone can take this and think, not from an injury perspective, but just remove yourself and think, right, I need to progress. I need to build on this. So essentially, that's my sort of why I've taken this 3 going on 4-year off season now.
Yeah, no, that was an absolutely excellent overview. And there's a lot of points that I want to dive into further here. The first thing that comes to mind, which I think is really interesting, and I'm curious about your thoughts on, when it comes to the natural bodybuilding scene, the UK scene is legit compared to the States. I'm not sure if it's bigger per se, but especially the junior category and even after, I just feel like the standards are higher in the UK, and you see another level of conditioning there, even size as well. And the fact that you mentioned, well, the weather is generally poor here, so we're not too obsessed over how we're looking on a day-to-day basis. And perhaps like as a whole, there is just like more of a widespread performance mindset over in that region compared to the States, and potentially playing a large role in how much better people get from season to season.
I'm not going to include myself in this, but I potentially could. I just don't want to come across as cocksure and arrogant, but there's a few people in the UK that have done wonders for natural bodybuilding, and I mean absolute wonders. When I started natural bodybuilding in 2015, it was a joke. Like it actually was a joke. Like you'd watch shows, and I came from a rugby background, so I already looked like I trained. I was a big lad, and I'd look at these people, and obviously they had a lot less body fat than me, but I used to look at them and think, you don't even look like you train. I can do this. And that was my original perception of natural bodybuilding. However, now, and especially from, say, 2016 onwards, maybe 17 onwards, the standard of natural bodybuilding has rocketed and it's become quite popular. And I feel it is down, especially in the UK. I know you're comparing it to the US versus the UK. And I feel the UK, the reason why it's so popular over here is because I'll include names. People like, obviously, you've had him on, AJ Morris. AJ's done incredible things for natural bodybuilding over here. Steve Hall has done incredible things. There are plenty more, but those two especially, because they have and always have been really active on social media, put out their journeys, documented everything. It's become cool to people, and they follow it, and they almost try and emulate it as well. And I think because I think a lot of the people that we have over here that look incredible naturally now are genetic elite, and those people could have potentially gone down the enhanced route But because of people like AJ, Steve, potentially myself, they've seen what you can achieve at a young age naturally. Because some of the juniors, like you said, we have over here are absolutely absurd naturally, like incredible. And I feel that potentially by having these people that document everything on social media, they chose to stay the natural path. And whereas in the States, maybe there's more of a consensus that your genetic elite will potentially go down that path because there's not the influence in natural bodybuilding that there is over here. I also feel that over here there's a lot more mixing between natural and hard scene. Like I said, when I first started, it was very divided. There were loads of stabbings going on all the time. I remember it. It's quite funny. And I used to get really offended by it. But now there's a lot of mixing together. Also, I feel that's because potentially companies as well realize that natural bodybuilding is a big outlet. So there's mixing within like companies, supplement companies, clothing companies. For example, I keep using him, but so AJ now being part of the Train by JP group, that's massive for natural bodybuilding. It puts him on a pedestal. We can see videos from him all the time. So there's a bit of a mixing between the two, which is good because then natural bodybuilders aren't almost ashamed of it. It is what it is. And we can both learn from each other. And it just drives on natural bodybuilding massively, I think. You mentioned that we are very performance-based. I'll bring another name into that. And I think the whole of the UK knows it, that Jordan Peters has hands down influenced that incredible. Like before him, even myself, I can tell you now, I didn't care about how much I lifted. I just went in as if I got a pump, it was all daisies, you know. I would just train and get pumped. And obviously I trained hard. I trained till I couldn't move, but I used to have a training coach, and they wouldn't even tell me how much was on the bar. We just lifted, because to them it was all it was about was just intensity and effort. That's all it was. We didn't really care about the bar, how much was on the bar. But now, Jordan's influence is massive, and you know when I started training, or even when I started bodybuilding, no one had a logbook. No one had a logbook at all. And now almost everyone, well, not everyone, but the percentage it's gone up by at least like 50%, you know. So I think he's very influential in that. And it's nice to see that it's gone over stateside as well now. And you've got boys over there that are big believers and proponents of the sort of progressive overload side of it as well. And it's growing over with you as well. Even though obviously the original Dante is from your side of the pond, but I think because he was so quiet for a long period of time, it sort of died out a little bit, but now it's sort of coming back over with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that history and context. I find it super interesting. Circling back here to some things you mentioned in your overview that are worth diving into, some of the nuts and bolts of this equation. You mentioned that your off season going on 4 years now is extended because in the natural bodybuilding sphere, not only does it take a little bit more time to make significant improvements, but also, like you mentioned, we have to consider there's a recovery period before we can even start being productive with our training again, which is going to take a few months, and that has to be considered. Not to mention the dieting length. I mean, a natural bodybuilding contest prep, it's like a minimum of 6 months nowadays. That's basically your year, recovering and then dieting again for your next show. Yeah. So for those reasons, it needs to be extended. Concerning your injury history, did that make your off season more extended than you otherwise would have? Would you still have went the 3 to 4 year route, or if you weren't injured, would you have just stuck to maybe 2 years?
I think it would have been 2, because last year I really missed the stage a lot, and I it's not even the competing element. I love the prep itself. I really did miss it last year. but my injury issues were making significant progress. I could feel they were making progress. So I just wanted to ride it out. I only then last year felt that I was really making progress. So that's when it also coincided when I was willing to start mini cutting last year, which is what I did. I finally felt that my performance was good enough. I had built up enough to then sort of see what was underneath. So that's why I mini cutted last year. But I sort of want to think, like, because I've had so long off the stage as well, this is a negative. You could think I've had a long time off the stage. When it comes to dieting now, will it be harder for me because I'm not used to when I competed back to back from 16 to 17, it was almost like there was no difference because I hadn't had an off season. I felt garbage the whole time. So I basically prepped for 2 years straight. So I was essentially on the grind all the time. Like I was prepping all the time. So it felt no different. Whereas now I've had this long period of time. Is it going to be harder for me to get into shape? Am I going to suffer a little bit more because I'm not used to it? Or not, potentially not suffer more, but feel like I'm suffering more because I'm not used to it. Because I've had it easy. I've had an off season for 3-4 years eating. Obviously, my diet is still incredibly strict, but it's a lot of calories. So I do sometimes worry. I'm not too worried about it, but I do sometimes worry, like, because it's been such a long time when I haven't been in contest condition. Am I going to look the same? Is it going to be slightly harder? But that potentially could lead into where there's scope for mini cuts, just so not only in terms of tidying up body fat, but just to make sure you can still do it, you can still handle a diet, give you a bit of a kick up the arse kind of thing, So
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about your general recommendations on off-season length because I think when we consider some of the factors in this equation, there's kind of a conundrum in place. So let me put this forth. When we consider the training age of the athlete and we consider the younger competitor, as you mentioned, it's definitely very possible to make significant improvements in a short period of time. And I would say because for the younger lifter, they simply have more room to improve. So they could take like a year off season and look significantly different on stage. But at the same time, perhaps they could utilize a longer off season because they have all this room for improvement. So why would they waste that dieting down when we know we're not going to make any progress? On the other side of the equation, we have the very advanced lifter. And you could argue that they're more or less approaching their genetic ceiling. There's very low potential to make significant differences. And since they're not going to change much regardless, they could compete every year if they wanted to. But at the same time, since they're so resistant to adaptation, you could argue, well, they should be taking the longest off seasons because they'll look exactly the same unless they really take all of that time. So with that being said, where are your thoughts currently on training age and how that impacts the length of the off season?
I think the way you looked at it is pretty spot on, really. So the first time I ever competed, I was 22. Yeah, 22. And up until that period of time, I'd never dieted in my life. So think about all these teens that compete. I'm not against teenage bodybuilders. I have a few on my roster, so I'm not against that at all. Potentially, if I'd been involved in the game from that age, maybe I would have. But I was playing rugby. But like I said, I had a pretty large physique at that stage anyway. I trained like a bodybuilder, but played rugby. Basically, that's what it was. So I never dieted for any period of time in my life until I was 22. So all that time was spent. I wasn't pushing food. I just ate what I thought was good. So I was just sort of standard chicken and rice, oats and whey, basically all the time. Very bro foods, but I just trained hard and ate like that. I think Chris Bumstead has said until he was about 20, 21, he never dieted at all. He just trained and ate, and that is where you're making all of your progress. So during that time, if you're competing as a teen multiple times, which people do, first of all, that period of time is when you're meant to be, your hormones are meant to be skyrocketing. And what are you doing by competing? You're putting them in the gutter. So whether that has long-term effects, it'd be very interesting to find that out, actually. There'd be probably some nice studies that could look at that, actually. But because once again, I'm not against teenage or junior bodybuilding at all. But yeah, during that time, I'd say you're a lot better off. I'd say either way, if you really want to compete as a teen, you wait until you are at the cusp of leaving teens into juniors so that you have enough. Because I would hate to compete as a teenage bodybuilder at 17, because all that's going to happen, unless you are a freak, you're going to get obliterated by some 19-year-old. You'll have wasted a whole year, and you probably will get a negative outlook on bodybuilding. That happens all the time. Because, you know, your mum or your dad will tell you you're the champion, but you're not really. So I'd say that probably goes for juniors as well. I didn't compete until I was the last year of a junior. So I had all that time up until the age of 22 that I'd been growing, basically, never coming down in a couple of I lie. I did a couple of holiday preps, but they are nowhere near the same. Okay, nowhere near. So yeah, I think I waited until the last year of juniors to compete. I felt that maybe that was a year too late, because then I never could, I couldn't compete twice as a junior, which is what I really wanted to do. But, yeah, so I think as a junior, you really do need to take time between your shows. So potentially compete once as a teen, realize where you need to be at, and then take a year, 2 years off, and then come back and do maybe 1 year then as a junior. I know it's cool to compete. I know it's cool. I enjoy it. I enjoy the preps, but it's not, especially at that age, it's really not good in terms of you lose out on a lot. That's the time in your life where you're sorting your life out as well. You know, jobs that could potentially come, jobs for life, university, stuff like that. I somehow managed to drag myself through my master's degree whilst competing, but did all right. So got that. But then looking on the other end of the spectrum, when you say if you are quite experienced and you potentially take longer offs, I think if you've got to that level and you need to make significant improvements, you've really been doing something wrong. Because at that stage, if you're an experienced lifter and you're that age and you need to make significant improvements, you've done something wrong on the come up. Because I can understand if you've got into bodybuilding late, maybe. So your actual physiological age is old, but your training age is young, then yeah, there certainly is scope to take longer off seasons. But if you're at that level now, where you've been training a long time, but you're getting on a bit, I think if you haven't made those changes by now, you're probably not going to. I know natural bodybuilders do peak a lot later, but you've got to weigh up at that age, how many times is, say, your significant other, your kids, your job in general going to allow you to compete? So I don't know, are you going to be able to compete every year anyway? You know, that's one thing you've got to factor in that we haven't even talked about yet, external factors. You can want to compete all you want. If your finances aren't there, if you've got other things going on, you've got to prioritize those, really. So yeah, we haven't even touched on external factors, but yeah, that's sort of what I think about like your age in terms of like length of off season.
Absolutely fantastic context. I think you made a lot of incredible points that are definitely valuable to consider for those who are thinking about when the next time they're going to get on stages and where they're at in their lifting career and what can impact that. And this kind of brings us to the crux of the conversation and something that I absolutely love what you're doing on social media when it comes to this whole performance mindset and basically showcasing, the process of becoming the best natural bodybuilder you can be. You mentioned how, the weather is pretty poor in the UK and there's not a lot of social activities that would really require you to show off your physique. So it's easy to have this performance mindset. But at the same time, Jack, when it comes to natural bodybuilding, you have a large following on social media, and that can kind of come with like these expectations as being a very successful natural bodybuilder. There's this perceived notion that you need to look a certain way all the time. And I think social media has done a lot of good for this industry, but at the same time, it's done a lot of bad. And I think that a lot of people are frankly quite scared of pushing their body weight, even though they might know in their heart that it's beneficial and it's required to become, to reach their maximal potential. But they don't want to lose the opportunity to post selfies where their physique is looking pretty good, and that could potentially affect their online coaching business. And despite all of these things, you have no issue with taking your top off and posting physique progress pics every week. And I think that's
every day. Every day.
Every day. And the fact that you're like, it's just like, for those who follow you, it's this constant reminder that, like, yes, this is what it takes. Like, I'm trying to be the best natural bodybuilder possible, and this is how I look in the off season. Because guess what? Look at my performance in the gym. Look at my logbook now compared to where it was a couple of years ago. Like, despite how I might look, I know for a fact that there's new tissue under here, and my performance is proving that. So, continuing down this path, I kind of want to just hear you and your insights on what social media has done for this community, the positives and negatives of it, and more or less what people need to primarily consider when, they're trying to balance their physique improvement, but then also having a business on social media.
I think to start off, the reason why I have a relatively good following on social media is because I say it as it is. I showcase everything. I don't glitz and glamour it. I say it as it is. The best thing, I don't care about people's perceptions. And the second you remove yourself from these perceptions, you will grow. You will grow because you're so focused on yourself and what you need to do to be better. Then the results speak for themselves. One of the main reasons why I can let myself go a little bit in off season in terms of my body weight, not in terms of like my regimen, but is the fact that I know I can get inside out peeled. I've done it 2 years in a row. So don't get me wrong, I get comments all the time in my DMs, like giving me stick from trolls and stuff. And I say to them, like, all I do is send them a picture of my backside with like lines from top to toe. And I'm just like, I've done it once. Do you think I can't do it again? So that's why it just makes me like, so I know in my heart that whenever I want, to the click of a finger, I could start dieting and get that again. And like I said a couple of comments ago, like I did start to worry at some point that I wouldn't be able to diet down again. But then I mini cutted last year, and after 6 weeks, I had lines from the top of my quad all the way to the top. So, still there. But social media is, as I mentioned before, there are people that are putting out there now really good content in terms of showing off that it's not a highlight reel, because they just document everything from day to day. So even the good days, the bad days, they document. Like, I'll be honest with you, I went through a period, probably for the whole of 2018, where I absolutely hated my physique because of the injuries. I couldn't train the way I wanted. It really got to me a lot. I didn't talk too much about that on socials because there's a time and a place, but I would still upload pictures daily. And I focused on the small wins for me. Like I wasn't happy with how I looked. Like if you go back to some of the pictures in like my peak weight in 2019, I was chubby. I can remember it really well. I had like a really bad farmer's tan, so like a t-shirt tan line, but it wasn't tan, it was burnt. So I had red arms and I was really chubby as well. And I just stood there and said, "Can you just take a picture of this relaxed shot?" Because I looked really like quite fat. But I said, I said to the guy, "Can I just take a picture of this?" And I put it up and I said, "This is me right now. I'm not tensing, I'm not doing anything, but my performance is the best it's been since my injuries. So I don't care because I know it's on the right path." And I can tell you now, that got over 1,000 likes. I don't know whether it was to do with the awful tan I had or whether it was the content, but it's like I said, if you remove yourself and become so performance-based, because even if you get too sloppy, your performance will tell you that, because you can't perform those high rep sets because there's still a place for those. You know, if you're doing cardio in the off season, you struggle to do cardio because you're getting out of shape. So if you become very performance-based, you still won't be able to get too fat. There'll be times when it'll tell you, "Whoa, you need to slow down." In terms of staying lean for social media, I think everyone is fully aware now that the people that stay lean on social media year round don't make progress. I think everyone now realizes that they have looked, all these influencers. Don't get me wrong, incredible shape. Simeon Panda is in incredible shape. He has stayed the same for as long as I can remember. If you showed me a picture of him 10 years ago, it'll be the same. 100% the same. But so I think a lot of people now are clicking onto that and they realize that you need to add a bit of weight, you need to get a bit chubby, especially from a natural perspective. And also what's on social media, what's now pretty cool is it's kind of shifting away from images and it's more videos and Instagram TVs, etc. So there's a lot more scope for people to become very popular on Instagram, not just through images. So a lot more is based on, you can put out informative content in terms of Instagram TVs, which is obviously a lot more worthwhile than someone standing there with their top off in front of a nice car. Also, a big thing is, obviously, I put up a lot of physique pictures, whereas there was a period of time last year where, say, for example, AJ Morris was putting up daily videos of his training. And I think a lot of people, that's pretty cool to see. So every day they were seeing a lift of his every day. So, and did that require him to be in good shape? No, you couldn't see it. He had a hoodie on, but he was lifting the most he ever has, which inspired a lot of people, and they were like, "Oh, that's cool." So it shifted away from the image kind of thing. It's getting further away from it now. It is sad because when I diet down, say for example in a contest, I'll get like 2,000 likes on a picture because it's lean, and then I'll put up a chubby off season, it struggles to get 300. But people stick with me because I just document the process and document everything. I don't, like I said, I don't glamour it up. I show it as it is. If I'm doing cardio at 4:00 in the morning, I'm putting it on. If I'm eating boring chicken and veg in my car, I'll put it on. So you don't. To summarize, you lifting some absurd weight is probably cooler than you having abs with your top off. I'd say that. And then if you can look further ahead, which a lot of people struggle to do, which I don't, luckily, I come off stage and the first thing I think about is, right, how can I be better next time I'm on stage? I don't care about what food I'm having post-show. I'm just like, what can I do to get better next time? People need to forget about having abs now and worry about how their abs are going to look when they're on stage with everything else in a year's time. So what's your chest going to look like next year? What's your shoulders? What your legs? Because no one can. All that matters if you're in it for bodybuilding purposes, all that matters is when you're back on that stage, how they look. Because those pictures that you take then, they'll be with you for life. Because I can tell you now, if I really wanted to, I wouldn't have to put up a current picture probably for the next 6 to 10 years, because I've taken so many pictures whilst I'm in sort of contest shape that I could keep churning out, way back Wednesdays, throwback Thursdays, flashback Fridays. I could keep churning them out. I've got thousands. So, and next year when I compete, I'll have another few thousand, so they can last me all my chubby days if I wanted to. But I did go through a period of time where I do that quite often. When I was sort of feeling a bit low, I'd post them back to sort of remind myself and remind everyone else what I'm capable of. But now I think I don't need to now. I think so. I don't know how to sort of round that off really, but there's a lot more ways to become popular on Instagram now than having abs, essentially.
Yeah, no, I think one of your final points there in that it actually probably is a lot cooler to see someone moving some massive weights with some pretty stellar execution rather than just seeing the same topless selfie every other day. And I think that's important to consider in all of this. Before we kind of slightly switch topics here, I think it would be nice to put like a general practical takeaway here for the listeners. And we would both agree that pushing body weight to some extent, having a performance mindset in the off season is absolutely key if you're serious about making improvements to your physique. A lot of people love to get stuck on the numbers, so they might think, oh, you can't go past 20% body fat in the off season, or you shouldn't take your body weight past 30 pounds over stage weight. And while those sorts of absolute figures aren't that useful, and again, like most things, the truth is somewhere in the gray rather than the black and white. Would you say that perhaps a good overall message for this is that you kind of just push your body weight and you keep tabs on your logbook, and if your performance is increasing, then probably everything is in the right place, even if you don't love how you look. And then also, perhaps to suppress some fear in this, is that if you get too sloppy, your logbook probably won't be improving. So for that reason as well, that's not a concern.
I think what would be a really cool case study, it's an impossible scenario. If you had identical twins and you put them, they're bodybuilders now, so this is outrageous. You give one a weighing scale that they are allowed to weigh on every day and they go into their off season. You give the other twin, they're not allowed to use the scales. So they just train their ass off and they eat. And let them decide for themselves what they do in terms of if they mini cut, how far they push. And I wonder which one of the two would make the most progress. So one of them's weighing in every day. The other one is just getting after it, training, logging their lifts, eating as they seem sort of suitable. And I really think that this goes for female bodybuilders as well, because like obviously for most of this I've just talked from a male perspective really. This is look like for females, this is even more important. And I'm really happy to see a shift in the UK scene, especially. I don't know what it's like over with you, but over here, girls are pushing body weight a lot more, and it's really cool to see. Because for them as well, they're not going down the beach every weekend, so who cares? All I'm seeing is you walking around in leggings with a big ass. Like I'm not seeing anything else, so it doesn't matter. But they're getting stronger, so they're focusing on performance a lot more. And guess what? They're all outgrowing their classes. There are girls over here that are making incredible progress, and it's pretty cool to see. So I'd say, like you said, scrap focusing on the scale as much, and let your logbook do the talking, and also how you feel day to day as well. Because what sort of set me off on my mini cut last year, not this year, last year, I was working in a school at the time, and I would turn up to every lesson and my shirt was drenched through. And I mean drenched through. The kids would have a field day, they'd grill me. And I just thought, that's enough. There's something wrong here. Because I went from being like 4-5% body fat, freezing in the peak of summer over here, freezing, to now literally I couldn't even walk to a lesson, I'd be sweating. So then that was when I pulled the plug. So things like that, you know, day-to-day activities, if you're really pushing body weight, can sometimes become like a chore. And if you're a natural bodybuilder, that shouldn't really be the case. I understand from an enhanced perspective, if you really are pushing things, you know, you sometimes have to suck it up. But from a natural perspective, you shouldn't really be struggling with day-to-day activities if you're increasing your body weight. And like you said, if you're at a stage where your body weight's quite high, your performance, it's not really going to be increasing too much. I know I mentioned it earlier, especially your high. People will reference powerlifters and say, oh, they don't care. Yeah, they're lifting one rep. You know, you try and go into your 15 rep squat when you're at your peak body weight, see how you feel. And from a bodybuilding perspective, those sets are the ones that are going to make the difference. So you need to be aerobically fit as well. Your lactate tolerance needs to be up there. So there's all these things. Your conditioning needs to still be good. So there's scope for all those things. So go off the logbook. Go off how you feel in general, in terms of like your day-to-day activities and stuff as well. I'd say if you went off that, you can't really go too wrong, really.
Yeah, I love that theoretical case study you presented. I think these thought experiments are extremely valuable when you get to discussing the potential nuances and outcomes of them, because at the end of the day, research can only tell us so much, especially when it comes to our specific population. And, you know, I think that just discussing the potential details of these types of things and the answer that you would predict can help lead to the truth. Like you said, your prediction, I would say the same thing. I think the twin focusing on his logbook, not obsessing over the scale each day, it is probably the best strategy for a extended productive off season. For a long period of time, these daily weigh-ins and obsessing over these little things don't mean much, but your performance from mesocycle to mesocycle and that increasing is definitely going to result in significant increases in muscle size.
And also daily weigh-ins. What does that do to you? If you're weighing in daily and you're worried about the scales, what does it do? Increases your stress. And stress is no good for gaining muscle. It's no good for dropping weight either. So, you know, if you're stressing about the scale, there's no good to be had from that.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on a couple of times the concept of mini cuts, and you are currently in the process of one. Rather than specifically outlining what you're doing per se, just to kind of get your thoughts on mini cuts, because again, with this whole need or perception that, you know, there is a look that you have to represent as being a physique athlete, I think these can be overutilized to some extent and basically kind of shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to progress when they're used too frequently. When it comes to a general recommendation for most people when it comes to mini cuts, what is your opinion? Is this something that perhaps, you know, you throw in once or twice a year, and if you're using it more than that, it's not a good idea? Or should we just try our hardest to, you know, structure things in a way where basically we don't really need to use one over the course of our extended off season?
I think, firstly, if we're talking about it from a bodybuilding perspective, it'll depend on how lean you got for your show for a start. If you got lean, you could potentially run a year easily without mini cutting. It depends. Some people need to push food more to grow than others, so that's going to be another perspective. Some people can make progress with like a 200 calorie surplus. But I think you should be able to get away with a year gaining without a mini cut. But we'll go back to what we said, and it'll all depend on how you're doing in terms of your progress in the gym and your day to day. I held off on mini cutting for a long time because I was very performance based. I wanted to sort the injuries out. I mentioned if you've got injuries, being in a deficit doesn't do anything for that. It's the worst thing you can do. It's going to focus on. It's going to come down to what your personal goal is, how long your off season is going to be. If you're doing a 2-year off season, I think within that time, you probably have room to put maybe 2 in. It will, however, depend on, one, how long you mini cut for and how much you take off. I'll use myself as an example. Last time, I took what I perceived enough off. Metabolism kicked in and I carried on losing once I added food back in. I was too hesitant when I was adding food back in. I essentially reversed out of a mini cut, which was the wrong thing to do because it took me, I think it was something scary. I think it was almost to the day, a year to get back to what I was. So from my previous high mini cut, it took me a year to get back to that point. So, wow. The mini cut itself was 10 weeks. So we'll say just over 2 months. So it took me nearly 10 months to get back to that body weight. So I took too long. So as a general guide on mini cutting, I'd say you want to be pretty aggressive with it. But you need to, once again, focus on that logbook because as long as you should still be progressing in a mini cut. You can. Maybe right towards the end you hold, but you can slash your calories enough to where you can still perform well. You've still got a decent whack of body fat on you, so you're still going to have energy stores there. You can still perform. Because you want to get in and get out as quickly as you can, really, because you can just get back to growing then. So I'd say, I don't want to say 4 weeks, because some people might be able to get away with it. Depends on how much body fat they have on them. But I'd say you're looking at more 6 to 8. And then I'll take my own advice now and not to reverse out of it. So once you come out of that mini cut, I wouldn't, because I'm in this conundrum now. I don't know what I'm going to do when I come out of it myself. I feel that it would be stupid of me to go back to the exact same calories as I was previously, because you've almost got this period where you're skipping what you could get out of the food previously. So if you go straight back to where you were, so say if I went back to 4,500 calories, I could have had progress maybe at 4,000 calories. I could have been making progress then without the need to push for that 4.5. So without riding that progress ladder straight away, maybe I'll go back to just below 4,000 for a period of time and then look to push on. But I'm certainly not going to waste a year to get back to that body weight. However, I will defend myself and say that body weight looked drastically different to when it did last year. So when I hit 220 this year, it was a lot different to what it did last year. So certainly not a wasted year, that's for sure.
Awesome. Before we wrap up this discussion, I think it would be great to touch on training, especially in the context of we're kind of placing a lot of value on what the best in their sport are doing. When it comes to your training specifically, and kind of, I guess, maybe the trends we see in the UK here potentially when it comes to people like Jordan Peters or AJ Morris, we tend to see that volume is a little bit lower per session or on a weekly basis, but this seems to be compensated for in terms of relative intensity or the effort per set and training to failure on most sets compared to others who might train with a higher volume. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you utilize a pretty similar approach, probably a little bit lower volume, relatively speaking, and higher effort.
Both. No, I do. I'm fairly high volume, and I consider myself fairly high effort as well. Um, I think what I'll say is but I've always trained that way to start off with. But I'll say because of some of the injuries I have relating to like posture, my ability to maximally recruit muscles is slightly compromised. So I may need an addition. I may not be happy with. I'll take it to all I can, but I might feel that it's not. I haven't really exhausted that muscle because of the recruit. Essentially, I had a postural issue, and my motor recruitment and patterns was all over the place, and it's still not spot on, but it's a lot better. So I can't get exactly what I want out of those two sets, which a lot of people do. Okay. So I may throw in a fourth set, which I quite often do. But at the same time, I'll say that I am very guilty that I love a pump as well. I absolutely love a pump. So even if I am absolutely fried, I'll still do more. There are periods when I know enough is enough, though. Like stuff on legs, for example, like 2 sets. I can do 2 sets on most things in legs because I really can. But say on like a incline dumbbell press, I can do them all day just because I love the pump I get from that, and they're not too taxing kind of thing. You know what I mean? But I've always trained like that. I also have a very like high ability, like recoverability. Like I can recover really well. And that was made evident to me when I was a kid. Like I would scar really badly. So it would be like a normal scar, but then it would excessively scar on top. So it would be like really thick and come out. And I got told from a young age it's because your body like over recovers. So I think that has helped me. At the time, I didn't relate that to training at all. But I feel that does benefit me in terms of training. I never get sore ever. I never have. My frequency can be quite like really high and doesn't bother me at all. So in terms of that, I'd say that does help me. So a combination of that and the recruitment side of it has just sort of allowed me to train at higher volume. And also, I don't like to admit it because I put the persona out there that I'm trying to be the best bodybuilder I can. But I enjoy training more than I enjoy being a good bodybuilder, which is kind of not the image that a lot of people put out there. But I love to train too much. So if I do another set because it feels good and I get a good pump from it, I'll do another set. That set certainly isn't a fluffy couple of reps in reserve. I can tell you now, that's all out. But it's just because that's what I enjoy. You know, some of the stuff that I do isn't always like Jansen puts a good point out that you should be training for progress, not because you enjoy it. But for me, I kind of go against it. But at the end of the day, if that's what keeps me turning, then it is what it is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, especially for your specific circumstances. People tend to utilize this lower volume approach because they feel they can maximize the stimulus from each set. And as such, they don't need as much work. But when we look at different things in the research, it appears like if you do keep a couple reps in the tank, or if you keep your rest periods short, you're simply going to need to perform more work to kind of compensate for that response. So in your case, if you feel, an inability to maximize the stimulus in a set or get to those critical high threshold motor units, then you're going to have to do a little bit more work to get where you want to be. I think the psychological aspect is definitely something that's really interesting. I think all of us in this pursuit kind of suffer from the same disorders per se. Like myself, I have a deload coming up. I don't want to deload. Basically, at this point in my life, I've gotten used to eating shit when it comes to hard training, and I like eating shit. You know what I mean? It's just part of the process. But we kind of know that, taking a brief period to reduce some of this accumulated fatigue is a good idea. But we're just addicted to training. I think a lot of us get into bodybuilding not because, we saw people competing and we saw the stage and we were like, oh, that looks, amazing. I would love to be a part of that. It's simply because like we're addicted to the iron and we're addicted to making progress. And we're like, well, how do I do this competitively? Well, you compete in bodybuilding. It's just kind of like a byproduct of loving the gym.
Yeah, I've said it on so many podcasts that I bodybuild because I love to train. I don't train because I love bodybuilding. You know what I mean? Like I said, I was a rugby player and someone looked at me in the gym and said, oh, you could probably compete. I was like, all right, okay. So that's where it came from. I already had the physique, and that physique was built on because I just love to train. So.
For sure. All right, Jack, that's all I got for you today. I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. I know our listeners will as well. For those who aren't already supporting you, where should they go to find out more about you?
I think it's mostly just Instagram, really. Well, I say just Instagram. It's a lot of Instagram, so be prepared for a lot of stories. But I try and keep them as sort of informative, but some comedic value as well. And that's Jack_Thorburn on Instagram. Thorburn, not Thornburn, as you rightfully put. So it's just Instagram, really. I do offer online coaching as well. It's not like my main source of income, but if I can help anyone out in the process, that's fine. So information on that is on my Instagram as well. But apart from that, Mike, thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, man, an absolute pleasure. And those resources will be in the show notes. But that wraps it up for another edition of the Muscle Memoirs podcast. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.